Welcome to Unit 3 of EDSE 512. Great job on the discussion board last week. Thanks for all of the insight and the fantastic examples and additional sources. This is really the way to get the most out of these discussion boards rather than just going through the motions, making it routine participation and trying to meet the deadlines. We really want to take off here and get some new ideas going, ask questions, and tap into the resource of knowledge provided by your colleagues. We have a great community of learners in this course with a lot of different backgrounds, levels, and various student needs and settings. So do take advantage of that as we do these discussions. We will have another chance to do one in this unit. Unit 3 focuses on types of assessments. So we've built a pretty strong foundation over the past 2 units discussing what assessment is and how to do it well and how to do it accurately and effectively. And now we'll be able to talk more about different types of assessments. You can see the assigned reading here, and we will need to do the discussion board for this unit just as we've done before. Same posting deadlines, same source citation requirement. Make sure that you're getting on there and reviewing any questions that your colleagues have asked back to you also. That's another good way to stay involved. So as a reminder of the course schedule, we know that the initial discussion response is due Monday by 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And you can see what we just discussed in the graphic organizer, which is we've got types of assessment as a focus here. And we have the assigned reading, the discussion, and all of the activities, which is the content that is provided to you within the unit. As we look forward as well, you can see that we'll be moving into concepts of special education, not just assessment, but focused on the evaluation process itself, how we can update present levels of performance for students and get things going for them with that IEP document, making sure that we're writing effective and measurable goals and examining appropriate accommodations, modifications, etc. So it's always fun and interesting to look ahead at the course schedule, make sure that we're aware of what's coming. We're looking at our foundation of assessment here. Later, moving into more procedural components of the IEP and of special education as a whole. So as with previous units, we'll see we've got the lectures here. You can download the handouts for your notes if you choose. There are a couple different parts for the lecture in this unit, so just be sure to review all of those. I'll open the first one here so we can take a look. And in these lectures, we will be discussing types of assessment. We do have formal versus informal assessment and some different specific types as we go. You can see not only types of formal assessments listed on point 3, but also types of informal assessments on point 4. So when we're conducting a formal assessment, this might be a test, and we'll see several different examples as we move through the unit, but I'll just throw one out as we speak. For the educational or academic levels, the student might take the Woodcock-Johnson test. It's a test of achievement, and the academic component for that. And that would be the most recent version. Obviously, you always want to be utilizing the most recent version. You'll find that there are several different ones. So you can check with your district or the entity that you're servicing for students as you're assessing them to make sure that you have the most updated copies and protocols to match that copy. You'll also see assessments for intellectual or cognitive functioning. So those would be testing students' capacities, both with a full-scale IQ score and with many different types of scores within that, subsets of that test. So that could be visual, spatial, for instance, or processing speed. Different components of cognitive functioning would be examined because we all know that the full-scale IQ score doesn't tell the full story. And so we need to gather more information and use that along with a robust body of evidence in all areas where evaluation is necessary to make sure that we're planning for the needs of the student. So, as mentioned before, taking a look at formal versus informal assessments, we know that the formal assessments do have one expectation, a single set of expectations for all students. And so, as mentioned, the Woodcock-Johnson test is an example of this. If you've not used or been familiar with this test of achievement, you may use it in the future. There are specific batteries of questions that must be asked for students, and you have to do these various subtests for reading, writing, and mathematics is what it comes down to. But in the writing one, we might be testing spelling, we might be testing sentence structure. In the reading, we may be testing for fluency, testing for comprehension, testing to see how they can sound out or interpret words that are known or unknown, and for instance, even interpretation of nonsense words and really sounding those out accurately. Words that don't even exist, that students have never seen before. So there are all sorts of types of sub-tests that can be within that total test, and then you will be scoring these in a measured manner. So there is a scoring guide for a test of this nature, and you'll take the protocol where the student has provided responses, and you'll score up what's accurate, what was inaccurate, which types of errors might be recorded. So for instance, with reading aloud, you could be looking for mispronunciation. You could be looking for omission of a word. You could be looking for insertion of a word. And you are recording those errors as you go so that you can punch all of that information into a system on the computer that then will process a score report for you. And you'll be going based on the criteria. It could be standard score that you're looking at. You may look at greater age equivalent, but we'll talk about limitations to those in this course. Oftentimes, the standard score is the most useful measure for assessment, and percentile can also be valuable when comparing to students across the same age or grade level to figure out where your student falls within that normal curve. And here is a list, as just mentioned. There's the Woodcock-Johnson and several other types of formal assessments. This screen, we'll take a look at informal assessments. You do these all the time when you're working with a child, even if you don't realize that you're doing it. These can be used without cutting into instructional time. So if you've got testing, standardized testing that you have to do that takes up a day or a week of instruction, obviously that's formal assessment. Informal assessment could be something as small as an exit ticket. You might be even just doing a check for understanding, and these quick assessments, they could be verbal. You want to be taking data constantly as you go, both formally and informally, to figure out where students stand, what they're learning, and what still needs to be addressed for them. And you'll see there are several different types of informal assessments that are included in here. You might be looking at a portfolio. That's one example. So going through a student's writing samples, it can be helpful to access a journal for one subject and perhaps for another subject, because students may write differently depending on the content area. Really go through and look at what kinds of errors are being made, what kinds of sentences or paragraphs are being structured, and how effectively. That's an example of a portfolio assessment. So that can be a good way to determine student performance and achievement levels. These are looking at students' mastery levels, and as this mentions here on this slide, they may be teacher-made and they may also be sold, and so there are several different options for that. These can be helpful for progress monitoring IEP goals, but as mentioned, please do, as we've talked about in the first 2 units, ensure that teacher-created or staff-created assessments are valid and reliable and evidence-based. So you can continue to collaborate with your colleagues as we talk about that. It is a very important reminder, because if we are creating assessments, we want to be sure that we're testing the right thing and that we're testing it accurately and well. So you'll go on through this presentation. That's just the start for it. You do have the handouts linked there in PDF format. There is a part B, and then we'll move into this written part of the unit, and we're looking at types of assessment just as mentioned in the previous lectures. So more information, we've got a visual here just in case you do need more detail about formal versus informal assessment. We have a page here, and this information is quite relevant to what you saw in the presentation. There's some additional listing here for examples of reading and writing tests, for instance, and we do go into math and behavior assessment on that page as well. Once again, examples, so it really does break down what we just talked about for these informal assessment options. You may check out this portfolio assessment PDF, as we were just addressing the idea of the portfolio or of work samples. This will be provided to you within the unit as well on that page. So I would encourage you to check out this article, identify the goals of the portfolio, and determine types of portfolio to be used. And then you can just support the student in procedures for organizing a portfolio. And then you'll be looking through classroom projects to ensure that what you're selecting is related to the objectives of the portfolio. So as I mentioned, a writing sample could be very valuable. There is a list here of several different types of work samples that could be appropriate for gathering in a portfolio, depending on the objective related to that portfolio, which would probably be in alignment with an IEP goal if you are working as a special education teacher. So we'll see more information regarding considerations for assessment, such as selecting the right test. And there are several steps to help us figure out how to choose a test and assessment. Majority of districts, if you are working for a school district or any academic setting at all, really, you could inquire with leadership about this. There should be a test or assessment library where you can access anything that might not be at your site, and those should be pretty comprehensive. Assessment is a big part of determination for special education eligibility. So when you are doing that determination, you want to be sure that you have that robust, comprehensive assessment mentioned earlier in this video. And many of the tests that are listed both in your lecture in the PowerPoint as well as in these pages within the unit will address those different types of assessments and give you some examples. Do keep in mind what we're talking about right now is quite valuable not only for special education eligibility, but also for progress monitoring on IEP goals and progress monitoring as a whole. And to move clearly, as we've got this section addressing the measurement of progress, talking about the value of progress monitoring, many school settings are really becoming more rigorous when it comes to progress monitoring requirements, and that's a good thing. It's important that everybody is held accountable. So this is an article about tests and measurements with a legal perspective in mind, and it is because it is from rights law that we have that legal perspective. So that is quite valuable to us. You can see there's a case study here with a student named Michael and several others. And there are links within this article if you would like to review them. That may be helpful to you as well, looking into these case studies and that content for measurement of progress. Continue with the progress monitoring. Remember, you want to set time for your progress monitoring that it's going to occur. So for instance, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, and then make sure that you get those data points from the baseline and continue to measure for growth, adjusting your strategies as needed. Predetermination is a very important topic also to consider from the legal perspective. Predetermination would be a decision that a team is making prior to the IEP meeting. Could be with placement in particular is often where you see this. For instance, if a team has decided that a student will be placed in center-based programming or in a separate school environment, or that a student will or will not be eligible for special education. This is actually against special education law. So you can see several examples listed here. This is why we do an IEP draft and present it and discuss it with the family before we would ever make an educational decision. And that helps us to avoid litigation and conflict. Finally, we have our discussion board, and this will help us to reflect on some of these topics we've introduced within this video. Please reach out with any questions. I look forward to hearing and reviewing your thoughts on this DB.